Welcome to HG's Digital Summit. I'm John Cranmer, a member of the Portfolio Technology team at HG, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Sanjit Ganguli and Akshay Grover, respectively CTO in residence and Global PE Practice Lead at Zscaler. Zscaler is a cloud-native cybersecurity company which provides a zero-trust security platform delivered entirely through the cloud. And in recent years, they have brought AI to bear in an increasingly complex threat landscape. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So before we sort of delve into the technical questions, it'd be really good to understand each of your journeys through cybersecurity so far and what brought you to your roles at Zscaler today. Akshay, would you like to kick us off?
Absolutely. I'm an outsider to the cybersecurity industry. I was not a part of cybersecurity until about 4 years ago when I joined Zscaler. I was a career consultant. I started my career with Deloitte and went on to become a partner at PwC and focused on strategy, operations, mergers, acquisitions, private equity for 14 long years. And I made a shift to industry with my first stint was with Salesforce, where I built a M&A and private equity practice and also led 14 of their largest integrations that Salesforce acquired about 14 companies during my tenure. But when I got a call from the office of the CEO at Zscaler to build a business which would help companies integrate faster, I was not sure. I was not sure where I'm stepping into, but the key word there was, it was a SaaS-based solution from cybersecurity standpoint. I did a lot of research and then I fell in love with it, And then 4 years later, I am a biggest proponent of cybersecurity for young and upcoming students to build a career in cybersecurity, because there is a long way to go for us, and it's a very, very thriving place, and we love it here.
Well, it's great that you've had that experience and discovered the real value in it. So thank you very much for that. Sanjit.
Yeah, well, I think similar to Akshay, I kind of fell into this space as well. You have to understand at our age, there really wasn't a cybersecurity career path back in the 90s when we were in university. So fell into it by accident, studied electrical computer engineering in university, was a chip designer for many years, worked in the oil and gas field for a while, satellite space, networking. But then about 10 years ago, I became a Gartner analyst. And as a Gartner analyst, you get a sense of the industry. You see kind of what's going on, what trends are emerging. And 5 years ago, zero trust started to become very hot. 5 years ago, the cyber threat landscape started to change. And Zscaler as an analyst, kept popping up on my radar. Like it just kept coming up as an alternative to traditional methods of doing security. So when Akshay, I got a call from the office of the CEO as well. And what's interesting is I joined Zscaler March 2020.
Yep.
Remember the date the pandemic started. And the day I joined, Zscaler's cloud saw 1,000% increase in its traffic.
Wow.
Because everyone went home. Security changed kind of on its face. So since I've been at Zscaler, I've joined the CTO in residence team, which is a kind of a unique space to be, frankly, from a career perspective, because what does that really mean? But the joy is I get to work with companies, PE firms, and basically advise them on their transformation journeys as they move toward kind of this new zero trust.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
So my next question is for you, Akshay. When we're thinking about merger and acquisition periods, they're often quite risky from a cybersecurity perspective, and it'd be really good to understand what your understanding of what those key risks are and how taking up a zero trust posture can help facilitate that and reduce the risk during that integration period.
Absolutely. And having spent a lot of time helping companies integrate acquired organizations during my career in consulting and hence forth after that and SaaS company like Salesforce, mergers and acquisitions are inherently very chaotic periods of time in any company. It's exciting. It's a lot of excitement across the organizations, but they're very, very chaotic. I'll state one study. McKinsey did a study a few years ago wherein they basically laid out that in an M&A situation, the propensity of a cyber attack increases by 10x to 100x.
Wow.
Can you believe that? 10x to 100x. And first I was like, not in disbelief, but then I kind of started to think about it in terms of why that happens. And to your point, I mean, because there is a chaos around M&A, so an announcement happens, then there is a close period, and when the current regulatory environment, sometimes the close period can extend beyond the typical 30 days. And it could be 6 months, it could be a year, and there is a period of uncertainty across the two organizations. And that's a very, very ripe time for attackers to think about driving some kind of unrest in either of the businesses. Typically, what we have seen is that the acquired company, which is typically smaller, they get the hit. They get the hit first because I think when you get acquired, the sentiment is very different.
Yeah.
You know, the people in charge of cybersecurity, the people in charge of the organizations are kind of in a state of flux in their own head. The major items that go into in their mind is, will I have a job? Will I be respected? Will I be adjusted to the culture? I mean, they're thinking about their own existence in the near term versus controlling the risk that may happen. And typically, it's rightfully so. They also have a security posture that may or may not be as robust. And attackers take kind of those situations and make a move. So that is kind of one of the reasons. From announced to close period is one area or one time period that is very, very different. And then post-close, now the organizations are coming together. There's integration work going on. And you know, the governance around integration, and that's what I used to do for a lot of years, is somewhat lacking in these organizations. So I think there's a lack of awareness, lack of visibility into how the security frameworks and the postures of different organizations are kind of meshing together.
Yeah.
And there's network integration going on. There is data being sent, sensitive data across the two companies. There are disgruntled employees. There are insider threats that emerge. And I think both external and internal threats kind of add up together to drive this kind of behavior.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Really good to get your insight. One for you, Sanjit. What do you see the key benefits of taking on a zero trust posture is to help drive that integration more rapidly?
Yeah, it's a great question. And typically we look at it in two different ways. One is the reducing the risk that's associated with what Akshay just went through. And the second one is really around operational efficiency. But John, let's take one moment back, because everyone on the call and who we're watching today may not understand exactly what zero trust is, right? It's been a term that maybe has been overused, maybe a bit bastardized by a lot of different organizations. So when we think about zero trust, it is basically an architecture / framework / way of thinking to solve a huge problem with traditional architectures, which is essentially too much trust, right? So John, let me ask you a question. If I came to your door at 3 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
would you let me in?
Probably not.
Okay, would you let me in and let me wander around your home?
Absolutely not.
Right. I would argue, if you were a regular network, you would. Networks are listening. Networks are very trusting. So network would certainly allow me to connect, maybe not let me in, but one compromise, I can get in and move and look around. So that's the problem that zero trust is trying to solve. The overly trusting nature of existing architectures. And frankly, once you compromise those architectures, the ability to move around, find data, exfiltrate data, which is a classic steps that all these breaches take. So how does zero trust architecture solve that? Kind of in 4 ways. One, it removes this implicit trust. Basically takes the approach that nothing should be trusted without being verified.
Yeah.
And there are various ways to verify identity and context and things like that. Number 2, it makes sure that the ability to move laterally becomes really difficult. So imagine in your house, locks in every door, right? Blinders so I can't see your layout, for example. Number 3, it removes the risk of compromise. So by scanning and looking for malware, looking for phishing, looking for ransomware attempts, it removes the ability to compromise. And finally, the 4th thing a zero trust does, it makes it really hard to exfiltrate data, to steal data by putting blocks and checks and things in place. Okay, so with all that in mind, back to your question on M&A. When you have the issue that Akshay laid out, number 1, zero trust provides risk reduction. So Company A is being acquired by company B. You put a zero trust architecture in place. Think of it now as a broker that sits between both companies. So zero trust architecture is protecting company B because the risks are being mitigated, the attack surface is being reduced, the lateral movement's being minimized. But now you bring company A into the mix, you apply the same, immediately you can apply the same controls on those acquired employees. The same controls, because you have this kind of centralized architecture that everyone's going through. Now the challenge is when you do this integration, traditionally, network integration is really difficult, right? The whatever mitigations you might have, company A may not have had, right? You can't control employee behavior. So where zero trust comes in from an operational perspective, it simplifies a lot of these problems. One thing about zero trust is that it removes the network, the layer 3 network, from being your central source of communications. Everything becomes more of a layer 7 approach.
Yeah. So it's more abstract, and you're not relying on old-fashioned.
IPs and ports are a terrible way to deal and figure out overlapping. So IP addresses and ranges and all these different things. So from an operational perspective, integration in zero trust world doesn't require any network integration. It's all brokered through the zero trust architecture. We see a lot, so I'll give you a couple of examples where the risk reduction and network integration became really easy. So, we were dealing with this, large industrial company. They bought a smaller company. They said, we want these acquired employees to be working on day one, right? We don't want to wait months to get these new applications onboarded and ruin morale. Because everything was going through a zero trust architecture, they were able to get these new employees onboarded within days, maybe a few weeks, and then using techniques like browser isolation, right? Giving them an isolated enterprise browser, employees on day one were able to access critical applications of the acquiring company, be productive, while still providing a full kind of zero trust environment so that there was no sensitive data leakage. So really interesting use cases for zero trust and M&A.
I'll just add one more point to what Sanjit said. I mean, in terms of the biggest barrier to completing a successful integration is always predicated on IT.
Yeah.
And the business kind of always looks for a function that is not able to perform in these setups. And 9 out of 10 times, the name of IT comes in. And what the approach that Sanjit described just now, what it does is that it takes IT out of the equation, because now business teams are able to collaborate effectively. The time to value for these acquisitions is very, very important for the synergy realization.
Yeah.
And then the user experience goes up, the business agility goes up. So over a period of time, right, like if you are a serial acquirer, you get this superpower with the zero trust approach, wherein you could latch in any number of acquisitions and kind of make them productive on day one. And beyond that, you could rest those applications and infrastructure very quickly and drive synergy realization.
Brilliant. And I think that sort of kind of leads into my next question that I've got. So we hear a lot that sort of old-fashioned or legacy ways of doing things, so firewalls, VPNs, aren't really sufficient in the modern world. I'd be interested to get your view on that and understand why that isn't the case and what the key limitations are.
Yeah, I would say like firewalls and VPNs were sufficient and relevant 15 years ago. So there's been a particular use of those technologies because there is a considerable amount of applications that were sitting in the data centers. Very relatively few folks who were working from home, and VPN was not the norm. It was just an option for people to log in at say at night, or perhaps we are working from home one day. That was the norm. But now fast forwarding to today, and in the last 15 years, the shifts that we are seeing, applications are moving to cloud. Users are more mobile.
Yeah.
And now the applications are distributed. The users are accessing from multiple devices, the applications on the go. And with that, the technology of firewall and VPN start to break apart. And as Sanjit mentioned and talked about the zero trust principles, one of the key things that are lacking with firewalls and VPNs is they connect user to the network.
Yeah.
Which is the anti-zero trust principle.
Well, you have to. You are trusting the user,
You're trusting
and you're
the user.
trusting the machine that they're connecting with, without having the visibility you'd really need.
You got it. So that's users, they're connecting users to the network. They're promoting lateral threat movement. They are also kind of providing a very poor user experience. And more importantly, they're increasing the attack surface, because what has happened in the past is that these firewall companies, what they've done is that they have instituted virtual firewalls. And every time you kind of shift an application to the cloud, they say that, yes, we have a solution. We could put a virtual firewall in front of that application. But what you're doing essentially is that you are increasing the attack surface, because each and every firewall point that you have is exposed to the internet. And anything that's exposed to the internet is going to be a measure or a place to attack for the attackers to come in. And VPNs, on the other hand, do the same thing. I mean, if there are like 1,000 employees in your company, and if you are accessing through VPN solution, you're extending your network to 1,000 different homes or 1,000 different places where people are working. So I think increasing of attack surface, the lateral movement that happens as a result of that implicit trust that you said, that if you are on the network, you're trusted. Those are the kind of principles which are really, really archaic now in the day and age of digital transformation and SaaS applications.
Exactly, and if you're approaching it from that perspective, you can't limit your surface to the smallest possible footprints to essentially give fewer points for an attacker to try and wheedle their way in almost.
What we like to say,
Absolutely.
John, we like to say, if you're reachable, you're breachable. If you're reachable, you're breachable. And to Akshay's point, I mean, if you look up just the news on the number of vulnerabilities that have been exposed on VPN concentrators, and it's a daily patching battle to keep up with it. And I'll be honest, cyber attackers are very, very good at finding those vulnerabilities and taking advantage of them.
And I think sort of with the evolving world of AI and the ability for much lower skilled attackers to craft exploits for vulnerabilities very, very rapidly, that's only going to get worse. And having that attack surface as small as it feasibly can be helps reduce that.
Yeah, I sort of equate it to, in the US, there's a lot of basketball. I don't know if you're a basketball fan, but it's an interesting statistic. The three-point shot.
Yeah.
The three-point shot, maybe about 10 years ago, players would make about 20% of their shots. Today, the number is about 40%. Right? Players are getting very good at making their shots. I equate that to cyber attackers. They're getting very good. And now imagine the hoop is not this small. What if the hoop was 10 feet wide?
Yeah.
As cyber defenders, that's what you're dealing with, especially when it comes to AI, is that the hoop is getting wider because attackers are getting better. And so defenses have to keep up.
And, it really does change the maths around everything. And that brings me on to my next question for you, actually, Sanjit. What are the emerging threats? We touched a bit on AI there, but what are the emerging threats that you think are going to be the most important and the most impactful on cybersecurity over the next few years?
Yeah, well, let's start with AI. I mean, look, the weaponization of AI has enabled and really, democratized hacking, right? So a low-level hacker, without really any access to, major amount of resources 10 years ago, was ineffective. Today, I would argue that they are just as good as any major attacker with the amount of data they have access to, the list of vulnerabilities they can get access to through things like Fraud GPT or just looking for vulnerabilities, and the access to the tools out there to go and find these vulnerabilities and take advantage of them. Gen AI really has made it much, much easier for attacks. And we've seen it already with phishing emails. But think about how good phishing emails have got from a few years ago to today. Extremely well written. I mean, I had one the other day that incorporated where I went to university and my friends that I knew. It just learned about me and crafted a very, very well written email. We actually did a test internally through our Threat Labs team, 7 prompts to go from essentially nothing to a beautiful looking fake Microsoft login page with a phishing, 7 prompts that anyone could essentially do and launch. So Gen AI has made it very difficult. Now, today, phishing emails are one thing. Extend that out to deepfakes. Yes. In fact, we heard the other day, this was an article that came out somewhat recently, somewhere in Asia, a fake CFO joined a Zoom call, and a low-level financial employee sent $15 million based on what the fake CFO had requested. We ourselves at Zscaler, our CEO is a pretty well-known voice. We had attackers synthesize his voice and leave voice messages on many of our phones saying, hey, I need you to send some credentials over, help me out. He also asked for money on an Apple gift cards, which maybe gave it away a little bit because the man has money. But you can imagine, the weaponization is going to become very, very effective and has already become very effective. What I worry about is that human beings are inherently trusting people. And that's not going to change. Human beings will always be inherently trusting people. And when you have attackers taking advantage of these AI techniques that take advantage of that, how do you solve against it? And you will talk about it, but zero trust actually is a way to put that kind of reduce the trusting nature of humans using technology.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think not only does AI evolve the way attackers are going to work, but it does give us an opportunity to start thinking about how we can evolve the protections that we have in place, how we can utilize the same tools as a shield against these new threats. Actually, how are you thinking about that at the moment? And how do you see AI working better for the blue team?
Yeah, Sanjit has painted the picture about the offensive part of it and all the social engineering tactics that the hackers are using. And I always, and we'll touch upon it in the future as well, but I always think about it as cybersecurity is a human problem. It's not a technology problem. At the end of the day, if you think about it, you and I are the ones who are clicking on those links. You and I are the ones who are actually getting duped. You and I are the ones who are actually getting convinced that you need to kind of do something. Until you do something, nothing happens in the cyber world. So coming back to your question around what kind of defensive mechanisms that we are seeing, I think AI is ubiquitous right now, and everybody's talking about it. It's going to be cliched at the end of this digital summit as well. But if you look at it, threat detection, behavioral analysis, this is all kind of being driven by AI. And the powers that are being embedded in these tools like our solution and other solutions is going to be really, really important to kind of detect the threats, to curtail those threats before they kind of take shape, doing some behavioral analysis like I talked about. And finally, I think it's really important for AI to help drive some of those proactive prevention mechanisms as soon as before the threat kind of really kind of takes shape in the organization, and before it percolates, you just need to diffuse it at the source. So those are the kinds of things, right? Like as you collect more data about the user behavior, collect more data about application usage, collect more data about organizational drivers that are kind of adding up to these threats. You are kind of getting smarter and smarter with AI solutions embedded into the cyber solution broadly.
And what do you think the secret sauce is going to be about? Is it the availability of data and telemetry to be able to say, okay, this is, what an attack looks like, and having delving into that in more detail? Or what else is it? What's the other thing that AI is going to make a difference?
Yeah, well, I think data has always been the issue, right? And I'll be honest, John. As a Gartner analyst, I was hyping AI well before I should have been hyping AI. Probably 6 years too early.
Yeah.
The challenge was data wasn't good data, right? And AI, bad data in, bad outcomes out. We're at a point now where the access to normalized data has reached a threshold whereby it can really be leveraged for interesting insights. But the secret sauce, I'll just give a couple examples to expand on what Akshay said, kind of real world examples of how AI is helping kind of in the cyber fight. One of those, let's say, is around detecting phishing campaigns. So like I said, 7 prompts to generate a good phishing campaign. What a lot of these attackers use are newly registered domains, right? And they're always changing. There's like these algorithms that constantly generate domains. It's very, very difficult to have policies in place to detect those. What if you used AI to look at, hey, is this a newly registered domain? How long has it been active for? Does it look fishy? Is it coming from a particular location? And use that to thwart phishing attempts in their spot. Another example is around data, right? How do you make sure that you're not leaking sensitive information? And in fact, the big issue is employees leaking sensitive information. Forget about it, hackers. employees are often leaking. So how do you put controls in place? The challenge with data has always been classifying it. In IT, how do you tell, I mean, you don't want to block everything. Employees will go crazy. How do you know what's sensitive and what's not? It's always been a big challenge. What if you used AI and a trained model to auto-classify the data and say, hey, these are medical records. These should not be shared publicly. Put policies in place to block those in its path. The other big issue with zero trust and cybersecurity in general is access rights. Who should be able to access what, especially with sensitive applications? So let's say, John, you're in finance and I'm in sales. There's a very critical financial application. IT teams struggle to figure out and create policies that are dynamic enough to make sure only you can access something that I cannot. What if you used AI to learn where users should be going based upon your department, your context, your behavior, and automatically created policies so that only the correct users have access to the application they need access to. So just some examples of how AI is useful. And to your question about special sauce, a lot of it is just having the data, the algorithm at the top of the data, and then the processing power, which the cloud is really enabled to be able to build the LLMs and to be able to make these decisions in real time.
And I can see exactly where you're coming from. I'm really excited about the opportunity to secure data better with AI. That's what I see out there as one of the real benefits of this, because at the moment, it's only the most mature organizations, people operating in defense and areas like that who really have the scale and time to do it properly. But I think this is going to bring the bar to having something effective far, far lower. And I'm really interested to see how that evolves over the next 12 months.
100%. Look, most attackers, they're after the data.
Yeah.
Right. And we're seeing a huge increase in encryption-less attacks, meaning that attackers don't even care about encrypting in the ransom.
No.
They want your data because, number one, they can release it.
Yeah.
They can extort you for it. And they can extort you forever.
Yeah.
Right? They have sensitive data. They can make money from you till the end of time. And so, to your point, knowing where your data is, knowing what's sensitive, classifying it, protecting it is absolutely critical.
And John, there's another angle to this, right? I mean, if you look at the cyber teams, the cyber budgets are not increasing exponentially. I think there's a cap to that. I mean, each and every organization is looking at IT budget, and within IT budget, the security budget in very, very kind of focused manner. And the cyber teams are stretched too thin right now. And what is happening with them is that if you look at a SOC, Security Operations Center, for folks who do not know what that is, but the teams are like very few people, maybe 2 or 3 people, who are flooded with alerts, flooded with what to look at, what not to look at, and then the AI solution on top of it is going to be able to help prioritize for them as to what is a real threat that they should be looking at.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's kind of a needle in a haystack, and they're trying to kind of focus on everything. It's a whack-a-mole for them, and that doesn't work. The second is like vulnerabilities. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, there are vulnerabilities which are announced and posted on the web every day. And how do you keep up with that? And each and every solution that they're using, whether it is, say, some of our sister partners, right, like in terms of Zscaler or others, I mean, they're all kind of providing them with vulnerability alerts. So I'm sure, I mean, in your past lives, you have seen it like, okay, now which vulnerability to fix first?
Yeah.
How do you prioritize? Because there are like 300 of those. If I kind of do this all, it will take me like a month to fix all these vulnerabilities. But how do I prioritize the top 5, top 10?
Yes, like which ones are actively exploited in the wild, which ones are on systems which are exposed to the internet, and help work through the pecking order so you can focus the limited resources far more effectively.
Yes, I think the value and the use cases are immense, because at this point in time, I mean, AI is just more of a superpower on top of the existing operations, which allows them to prioritize, focus, and yield the maximum results in a short period of time.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Sanjit, what do you think organizations are getting wrong with their security approaches at the moment? What do you think is the main blind spot that, gets forgotten about? Is it edge devices? Is it stuff not securing the endpoints properly? What do you think the problem is?
I'll be honest, John, I don't think it's a technical issue at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think culture,
Yeah.
processes, skills, politics eats technology for lunch. I think, what most organizations struggle with is kind of rethinking how you do security to begin with, right? I mean, and frankly, and there's something wrong with this. We have grown up in this industry around very traditional ways of doing security, right? And frankly, if you go out and get your certification in Cisco, you're going to want to keep using the old traditional methods of doing things. And I don't care how much money you spend on technology, unless you have the skills in place, the processes, progressive leaders that are going to push their organizations to rethink how they do things. And look, feathers are going to be ruffled when you go to a transformative way of doing things. But frankly, you have to, right? Otherwise, you'll get left behind. You will not be competitive.
So it's not just about technology innovation, it's about cyber innovation at the same time and moving forward.
You have to think transformatively. Yeah, I think that, and frankly, I think many organizations get it, but it does take leadership at the top, pushing down to say we are going to rethink all of what's going on. Now, beyond that, from your question, technically, what's an issue? I think point solutions. So if you think about kind of the world of security vendors, there's kind of this best of breeds, point solutions, platform plays that are in place. And what we find is that many organizations, the complexity that they've created by the tens, if not hundreds of point solutions, trying to put band-aids over a variety of problems, has created so much complexity that it is difficult to get a holistic picture of your cyber threat landscape, but B, when you're trying to protect and solve problems, you're playing Civil Chair, with all the different dashboards, trying to make sense of things. Now, at the same time, with the other extreme, there are certain, all-encompassing platforms, right, that do everything under one umbrella, that haven't always innovated, haven't kept up to things with how things are. And so other companies are stymied by the fact that their one vendor that they've chosen to go with doesn't have best of breed. And so what we advocate, and we'll talk about this in a second, it's kind of a Goldilocks approach, right? A handful of key vendors, specifically you mentioned things like endpoints, EDR solutions, endpoint detection and response, critical to protecting your actual devices. Identity, right? Having a solid identity play using IAM, identity access management vendors. What Zscaler does in what we call the SASE space, the service security edge, critical piece. And then you have your SIM, your SOAR, things like that. But key 4 or 5 elements of key vendors, all that talk to each other, reduce the complexity, reduce reliance on platforms, but give you the best point solutions to bring everything together.
And so you choose the best products that fit your business, and then but still focus on having that single pane of glass.
Correct.
Because you said SIEM and SOAR at the end there, and I agree with you, but I don't think it's so much of an afterthought. You need the basic pillars, but you need that layer 100%. On top. Otherwise, you're always going to be slightly stymied and potentially slightly blind to what's happening in the broader environment.
Exactly.
I would say complexity is the enemy of security. And I think that's what organizations need to start to rethink. And rethinking is hard, by the way. Rethinking is really hard. I mean, I think I'm sure you read a lot, and there's a book by Adam Grant called Think Again. And it's all about rethinking. So when you kind of challenge your assumptions, you challenge your dogmas, challenge how you've always done things, it becomes really, really important to kind of focus on securing your assets in a simplified manner and focusing on user experience. Because I think the holy grail of cybersecurity has always been better security, optimal cost, and better user experience. So if you up the dial on better security, the user experience goes down and the cost goes up. When you kind of go through a cheaper solution, your security goes down, user experience becomes static, and the cost goes down. I mean, there has not been a time in history of cybersecurity that all three have converged in a manner which allowed for a harmonized approach. And now we are approaching approaching that time wherein you could have all three.
Yeah.
And that's what organizations need to think about, like get rid of the complexity, focus on simple architecture that would allow them, to Sanjit's point, like have distinct pieces in place, like identity, zero trust solution, endpoint protection, SIM, SOAR. I think components which are basic components versus such a complex architecture.
Brilliant, thanks for that. So Akshay, what keeps you up at night from a cybersecurity perspective? When when you wake up at night in a cold sweat because you suddenly remember something, what are those sort of things that play on your mind?
Yeah, I chuckle on this question because I sleep really well at night. Yeah, so jokes apart, in terms of cybersecurity, if you think about it, I'm actually very excited about the time that is to come. With all this innovation that's happening in cybersecurity, I go to RSA conference each year, and I'm fascinated by the speed of innovation that these companies are bringing to the table. Yeah, arguably there are about 4,000 cybersecurity companies in the world today which are focused on solving different problems. And I think the pace of innovation is so high that every day you see like a new kind of way of kind of getting the hackers away or getting the attackers away around that. But I'm also fearful a little bit about how things are going. I think the one of the factors that keeps me up at night is the geopolitical uncertainty, right? I mean, it is uncertainty is what these hackers and attackers thrive on. And the last, I would say, with COVID and then with this geopolitical unrest that we are seeing in the last 4 years, it has come to the point wherein a lot of nation states are getting active. There are cyber threats that are coming on critical infrastructure that is going to start to impact the day-to-day individual, because I think it's no longer a government problem. It's no longer an enterprise problem. It's also a citizen problem, right? What if your electric grid gets hacked and eventually you are not able to work and there is like blackouts and everything around that? What if your phone lines, and which has happened in the near history as well, if your phone lines are hacked and then eventually you are not able to function? So the attack on critical infrastructure like nuclear power plants to utility companies to any kind of like colonial pipeline attack that happened, which was really disastrous, because there were long lines of people waiting for petrol or gas in their respective counties. But that's kind of one area. The other area is that if I look at enterprises, which are kind of starting to feel the pain. I mean, ransomware attacks, the amount of money that is going out there to protect and also to respond to such kind of ransomware attacks is really increasing on a day-to-day basis. The Change Healthcare attack that happened recently, it costed about $100 million to the company to kind of remediate that. So I think those are the kinds of things that I'm fearful about, that it is no longer an institutional problem, it's also a citizen problem, and then we all have to be more aware of this.
Because from my perspective, one of the interesting shifts we've seen recently is we're starting to see nation-state threat actors use the commercial hacker groups to do some of their dirty work, so they can spend their time and effort focusing on the more complex, government systems, and leave the more bread and butter stuff to these commercial entities and paying them to do it. And I think that's a real interesting shift. And if you have nation-state threat actors funding hacker groups, it makes life a lot more difficult, and it means those hacker groups are potentially going to have resources at their disposal.
Unlimited resources. And we started off with SaaS, like software as a service, then infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. Like a lot of AAS kind of eruption happened over the last kind of many years. Now it's RAAS, ransomware as a service. So I think it's like getting to a point wherein it's becoming an organized way of creating havoc, right? Like if they decide to do it, they can do it. Like meat plants were attacked recently. Healthcare organizations who couldn't process insurance claims were attacked. Colonial pipeline. I mean, those are the kinds of things that happen. But I think the positive part, Sanjit, and I'm sure you're going to agree with this, is that there's a lot more awareness than it was 10 years ago. There's a lot more awareness at an individual level because of the press that these attacks have received, and people are getting a lot more cautious about doing things that they should not be doing. I'll give you an example. I got a call about 4 weeks ago from my wife. Hey, should I pay this toll? I got a text message just now that we are going to be charged like this much money if you don't pay this toll. I'm like, could you please copy and paste and send it back to me? Why are they texting you with the toll charge? and she texted me back. I said, please take a look at the domain. Does it look suspicious to you? She said, yes, it does suspicious. So please do not click and please do not enter anything of your banking information. So I think the consumers are getting aware, the governments are getting aware, there's standardization that's happening, there's a lot of collaboration that's happening. So I see that, I think against the war between good and evil, good always prevails and throughout history. And I think this is, again, that period of time when we will see that again.
Excellent. So what advice would you give, and this was a question for both of you, what advice would you give organizations sort of navigating this, rapidly shifting cyber landscape at the moment?
So I think it feels very daunting to get started down a transformation journey. It's very difficult, right? As Akshay said, change is really, really hard. I would argue every step you take toward transforming is a positive step in the right direction. So what would I advise? Number one, what's your attack surface? Figure out what your attack surface is, right? What is exposed? What assets are exposed? Firewalls and VPNs that are exposed, servers that are exposed. What is your attack surface? If you don't know what you're trying to protect, you can't protect it. Number two, find out how freely can attackers move laterally, right? Run an Nmap in your environment and see what's exposed. See, do you have firewalls? Do you have things in place, at least to do basic blocking and segmenting in your environment? Number three, where does your data live? Most organizations don't know what applications they have, what data they have, especially ones that are very, acquire a lot of companies. We have organizations that have tens of thousands of applications with varying sets of sensitive data in all these different places.
And potentially duplicate copies of the same data.
Yeah. So where does your data live? So it's an awareness of what your exposures are, how flat is your environment, where your sensitive data is, and then start locking some of those things down. And with Zero Trust, I would say, an easy kind of advice, step one, get rid of your VPN, right? Remote access VPN is such the cause. If you look at almost every breach, it's through a compromised VPN credential. You're taking advantage. Avanti's in the news a lot because of all the 0 days, right? Get rid of that VPN. Just move away, go to a Zero Trust network access type solution. Then start figuring out, what needs to go, right? Firewalls, your proxy device that sits in your data center, right? Your secure web gateway, all of these are kind of antiquated devices, boxes that create complexity that can move into a cloud. Single policy, single kind of user interface to manage all of it. And you start moving toward an eventual Zero Trust destination, but every step along the journey is a positive step in that journey.
I mean, the way I always think about it is when you've got people sort of trying to move from a lower level of cyber maturity to a higher one, the advice I always give is don't let great be the enemy of good. You've got to start somewhere. Having, fundamental controls is better than having no controls whatsoever. So get them in, even if they're not going to be your long-term go-forward approach. You've shut the doors and windows, and that makes a real difference.
And not to mention, rethink policies you might already have. So I would argue bad security is sometimes worse than no security. Because what does it do? It incentivizes your employees to do really silly things and dangerous things.
This is really interesting in the AI world because we want to enable this innovation. And if cyber turns into the no police and blocks access and stifles that innovation, they're not enabling where we all need to get.
And you know what, I would say Sanjit covered like a lot of good way to kind of drive this blueprint of a secure enterprise. I believe in the KISS principle. I mean, keep it simple and stupid. And that is really important because, as I said, cybersecurity is a human problem. So I would say like three things. Number one, create the awareness in the organization through employee training about cybersecurity, what not to do, how to spot certain things before they become big. Because everything starts, I would say 90% of the attacks are either stolen identity or an employee clicking on a wrong link and doing something that they should not be doing. So how do you kind of make them education, training, awareness is number one. Number two is like, as we both spoke about, I think have a simple approach towards security. Complexity is the enemy of security. And I think nobody has ever been successful having a complex network architecture, having a number of point solutions. It's very difficult to see what's going on. So I think simplify as much as possible, trust solutions that are proven, adapt zero trust. I mean, like you said, start somewhere, start anywhere, but just start. That's kind of the approach that I would say. And the third is like, no matter what you do, no matter, I mean, you train the employees, you get the best tools in place, attacks are going to happen. So how do you have that incident response plans, your disaster recovery plans, business continuity plans? How do you do tabletop exercises in the event of a disaster, whether it's natural or attacker-led? You just need to have a plan. How do you get the business up and running? And I think between these three items and what Sanjit outlined, I would say that that's the advice that we would give together for the enterprises.
Be a good Boy Scout and be prepared. Brilliant. Well, Akshay, Sanjit, thank you so much for your time today. Been really good to speak to you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.